So by now, it's pretty much old news that Hiko has joined Liquid full time. Of course, it had been a rumor, or not really a rumor. It had been pretty well known, it seemed, for some time that he had been standing in for the team for a while, and was even publicly announced by some of the players of Liquid on social media that he was in fact trying out for the team. Then we had all this controversy about different, things that were published and said in social media and on different journalism websites about contract negotiations and all this mess. And this has been taking place now for several weeks, but it was officially announced last week that he was actually a full-time fifth member of the team. So basically what I want to do in this video is maybe take a look at Liquid leading up to the change and why in fact this change seemed necessary. Or at least some change seemed necessary, and this seemed to be one of the best options on the table as far as making a change. Talk about what actually took place in the change, maybe address some of the controversy just a little bit, but not too much. Then maybe talk about what we've seen from the team thus far with Hiko, though it is quite limited because they haven't played a whole lot with him since he officially joined the team, and even during his trial phase, it wasn't like they played a whole lot of stuff, and especially they didn't really play against a whole lot of top teams in the region just yet. So it's very limited data to work with, but we can kind of look at some of it. Then we can maybe look at hopefully what the outlook's going to be for the team, and maybe some suggestions on what else might need to take place if things don't work out with just this one change of Hiko joining the team. So, of course, leading up to why Liquid made this change was, I think, really, I guess, three key things that happened to me that kind of solidified that Liquid was probably going to need some type of change. The first, of course, was not qualifying for the ESL ESEA Season 1 Pro League Finals. They were certainly in the running, and I think they lost like a close tiebreaker to CLG for that slot to that event. But I know that certainly hurt the team not getting, one of those spots to that event, given, where they felt that they were at and where they should be, with them having a big brand behind them and having some of the talented players in NA and not making that, that certainly, I'm sure, didn't sit well with them and probably plagued their minds. Then you look at the Season 7 SEVO Finals, which they did in fact qualify for, but once again didn't go nearly as expected for that team. They did lose to Mouse Sports, just straight up got 2-0 by Mouse Sports, and then they went on to play CLG in a decider, or I guess not the decider of the group, but in kind of their second opportunity to try to move on to the decider after losing the opening round. And here they got 2-1 by CLG here, and thus were eliminated from the tournament. And then I suppose after that, the third and final thing, and I guess the last straw, was not qualifying for ESL 1 Cologne. So once again being denied entrance to one of the Valve majors to represent North America. And at this particular event, they had to play Tempo Storm and Cloud9 in the groups, in which they beat Tempo Storm twice in best of ones, but lost to Cloud9 in a decent game. And then in the semifinals, they had to play against CLG, basically a rematch of what happened at the Season 7 SEVO Finals. And again, they were bested by CLG, though this time it was a 2-0 series rather than a 2-1. And included in this was a pretty one-sided loss on Cash. They did play CLG pretty close on Mirage, which is a map they were able to, in fact, beat CLG on. That was the one map they won against them in the series at the SEVO Season 7 Finals in quite a one-sided fashion, actually. So the fact that they went from beating them very one-sided to then losing a close game, and then, like I said, I guess more generally it's the fact that they lost to CLG twice, when in fact, kind of going into the Season 7 Finals, you saw online play-wise when they had went head-to-head, it was actually a slight favorite for Liquid. I think they had them beat like 7 maps to 5 or something like that heading into the SEVO Season 7 Finals. So it wasn't as if they were a clear, super heavy favorite, and CLG had always kind of been regarded as a number 2 team in NA behind Cloud9 if you don't count the current Luminosity Execute Stars, since they're not truly a North American team that they do play in our region. Liquid was certainly trying to fight CLG to be number 2, and that was always their goal. Certainly to be a top 3 team, but certainly, wanting to contest CLG for number 2. And in either case were they successful. They lost CLG 2 LAN events in a row, making them place much lower than they had hoped for, I'm sure, given the brand that's behind them, and again, the players and talent that they have. You would expect a little bit more out of them in these situations. So I think those were probably the 3 really key things that probably finally forced a hand in the situation to make some type of change. And it was also a question of what needed to change. Certainly, bringing in more talented players could help. Maybe swapping roles within the team could help. Maybe new leadership or new direction in leadership, new strategy. All these different things probably came to mind. But the change that they decided to make was they did indeed drop Flosick from the team, or maybe he's a sub. I'm not really 100% sure. They did bring in a coach. Actually, they brought him in right after the CEVO 7 finals going into the Cologne qualifiers. It was the first event they had a coach for. Probably didn't have much of an impact, seeing as he had just joined the team as a coach, and probably didn't have a whole lot of time, seeing as there was only like those two events were back to back, right? The qualifiers took place the weekend after the CEVO final, so wasn't really much time to even implement a coach at that point. So kind of hard to judge the whole coaching thing off of that. So we'll kind of just leave that one alone. So that change was already made, though. They did decide to bring in a coach, and they had a coach in the past with D-Mode whenever they were competing, like at ESWC 2015, though D-Mode wasn't there. I think they had McNutty with them, who was a sub on the team. But some of their earlier play, they were trying to use D-Mode as a coach. I think they even used him maybe when they went to one of the Face-It events. But whatever, they brought in a new coach was kind of the point there. And then, Hiko, obviously, after the NA qualifiers, after all that happened with Nylum losing that sponsor, and Hiko was cited as, this killed motivation for the team. And apparently there was some personality clashes and some issues with having consistent practice and all this other stuff. Things didn't work out. I mean, that was Hiko's attempt to return to professional play after being let go from Cloud9 rather. And then he just kind of focused on streaming and doing work with Twitch and doing some casting gigs and all this stuff. Then he tried to make a comeback to professional play. Well, first off, by actually coming with these Liquid players, that actually makes it kind of funny. Was the original plan was to try to get Hiko and Skadoodle to merge with Adren, Nitro, and Fugly to create kind of this other, I guess, not really the super team that everyone talked about in A, but like a second team that would try to rival Cloud9 and even CLG. And then that obviously didn't work out because some of the Liquid guys didn't want to budge from the Liquid sponsor, and Hiko didn't want to sign with the Liquid sponsor at the time. This meant that Skadoodle wound up going with Cloud9. He kind of broke away from his little package with Hiko, but now Hiko comes full circle again, and he's back in this situation, but now he's actually just joining Liquid. And I guess it's interesting to maybe kind of talk about what would have been if Hiko would have just joined Liquid the first time around. Apparently this time it wasn't a problem to join the Liquid organization. Obviously he has a different mindset since things didn't work out with Symphis and the guys whenever he was playing with Nylum, and maybe opportunities are becoming more limited. And so now all of a sudden, it looks a little bit more attractive to join Liquid this time around, whereas it didn't in the past. And that'd actually be a really cool question to ask Hiko to see like what's different now as opposed to then, because honestly, you would think that the team that he would have originally been able to be a part of had he have just agreed to join a Liquid organization back in the day would have been better than what the team is now, because you would have had Skadoodle on top of having Hiko, so you had like a top opper, plus you would have had Hiko. It seemed like the team would have actually been better if it could have come together then, as opposed to now when Skadoodle is not a part of the picture anymore and all that. And now who is to blame for that? Is it Hiko's fault for not giving in to joining Liquid and being too focused on going with a different sponsor that was outside of Liquid? Or is it Adren for not wanting to budge and take the risk to leave Liquid to join up with Hiko and his new sponsor? I mean, that's unfortunately going to be one of those types of situations where we can sit here and play woulda, coulda, shoulda all day long, but in reality, there's no telling what would have happened then, and we just have to kind of focus on the present situation. But I guess it was at least interesting to kind of explore that, and that would be maybe cool to talk to him about in an interview or something like that. I don't think I've quite seen anyone mention that just yet, though there hasn't really been any interviews with Hiko since he officially joined the team, and that might be part of why. Anyway, so this is a decision that's made. Hiko joins the team. Let's talk a little bit about what this does for the team. So obviously, if you just look at the move itself, just straight up, which is minus Flosick plus Hiko at the simplest level, this seems like an upgrade, doesn't it? I mean, Hiko would certainly be considered a more skilled player than Flosick, he fits into that role just well. Flosick was the lurker for the team, or one of kind of the slower pace passive riflers on the team next to Fugly. And so role-wise, Hiko fits right into this. Don't really have to shift up too much else if you don't want to, though they have kind of changed some other things, right? So that made sense. Also, he's more experienced. I mean, he has a pretty good pedigree of having some good results in CSGO throughout its history with his times with 51 in complexity in Cloud9. So, I mean, on paper, that looks like an upgrade. It looks like a great move. And certainly since he's been playing with the team, he's looked good. I mean, he's doing his job. He's putting up good numbers. So all this seems like it was, in fact, a good move. And so there really isn't much to explore there. There really isn't even much to argue. I don't know what you could really argue there on what Liquid could have done that would have been better. I mean, you could certainly say that Liquid may need to make some other changes, or should have made some other changes to really improve the team even more than they did by bringing in Hiko. That's certainly something you can point at, but you certainly can't refute that this was, in fact, a good move. With that said, though, the bigger question to explore then, or the one that's probably more interesting, would be, was it enough? You know, is this going to be enough to push Liquid forward and actually become a true challenger? Or is it going to be a situation where, yeah, they've made this improvement, they have made this one roster change that is good, but it's not enough. Like, they still have problems, they still have issues they need to work on. And I certainly think that that is somewhat true. I think that you'd be crazy to believe that this one change fixes everything. I think there's many, or several at least, other things that need to be addressed for this particularly work out. Now, the first thing was, and I think that this has already been short-lived and is gone, was they were having issues with the opping role. Adren doesn't seem to like opping and calling at the same time. This especially affects him on Terra's side when he's trying to make mid-round reads or focus on what's going on, but then he's also looking to try to work a pick with the op, so his focus is kind of split, and he's always commented on the difficulty of being able to be the IGL and be the main opper on the team. On CT side, not so much so. I guess he felt like he didn't really have to focus as much on micromanaging players on CT side, and thus it was a bit easier to hold on to the opping role and still be the in-game leader, right? And I think that's still a problem that is trying to be addressed even to this day, because the first solution that was proposed was to bring on another opper, but that didn't work out. They didn't get Skadoodle. That whole situation didn't work out. I'm not sure if they ever explored any other options to bring in a different opper onto the team. Maybe in the future that still might be something they need to possibly do, but for right now they decided not to do that. So with that said, in-house, the first proposed solution was to let Nitro do the opping, which I guess Nitro wanted to do it, and Adren didn't seem to mind passing it on. This experiment pretty much failed. Just from watching them play with Nitro on the T side with the op, it just didn't seem to work. He didn't really seem to have a crazy impact. You know, in certain games, I would see him try to use the op on T side, and he just wouldn't get anything done. And then I'd see him a couple of rounds later with the rifle, because they couldn't afford the op or whatever, him bust out and have like a multi-frag round, have a huge impact. And it was one of those situations where I'm not saying that Nitro was an awful opper. He could actually maybe be a good opper if he were, in fact, to really practice it and use it all the time. And you know, just with repetition, I'm sure he would improve, and he's a good aimer, so obviously he could, to some degree, be a good opper. But it's one of those things, is what would you rather have, a good opper or a great rifler? To me, if this guy's going to be your star player or one of your star players, he certainly is one of their best players, one of their most skilled players. If that's the case, I feel like you would want to get the maximum potential out of them. You want to get the most you can possibly get out of that particular player, right? That would seem to be the smart thing to do. And to me, I feel like he's going to hit a much higher ceiling with the rifle in his hands than he's going to hit with an op. And I think most of the community, a lot of other top pro players and analysts and such, all made similar remarks and felt that it wouldn't work, or that it could work, but you'd still be limiting the impact that he could have for your team as a whole. His production value would go down, since he could be so much better with the rifle in his hands, especially in a more aggressive manner, whether it be the first man in or second man in or whatever. He has that quick aim, he has the good movement, he's great in open space duels, and so you would want to see him use a rifle at that capacity. And I think they have since already kind of reverted back to him playing in that role after talking to Adren just very recently, that the experiment was given up. Like, they're not going to use Nitro in an opping role going forward, which I think is good. And it's fine that they wanted to try it, but I'm glad that that they've come to their senses, so to speak, and have pushed him back to a rifling role. Now, from what I understand, in the past it was always kind of a Liege the first man in, and Nitro kind of the second entry, or maybe even third entry, because like I guess like Fugly and Nitro almost kind of interchangeable. Like it was a given that a Liege was kind of your number one man in on most occasions, but it was kind of a mix up between whether it be Fugly or Nitro. But it was usually Nitro who'd be kind of the other entry man next to a Liege. Apparently, for now, it's kind of been more of a priority to make Nitro kind of a first man in, an entry man, with Elige now taking kind of the second or third man in role. Now, I don't think this will necessarily be bad. I think it worked just fine with Elige being the number one man and Nitro being kind of your number two, number three. It was just all about putting in Nitro in proper positions to be that effective second man in. So I'll give the example on Cash. It would be, it seemed like there's a lot of times where he was playing squeaky door, where I thought he'd be better at A main behind Elige or something like that. He couldn't really entry that well from door. I think they switch things up on Cash, just to keep using that example, because now Hiko's new role on the team, which I guess I didn't address earlier, by the way. I know he kind of came onto the team as a lurker, but it is important to note that it's not the hardcore lurking position he used to have, in the sense that he's not the one all the way off by himself and not a part of the attack whatsoever. He's not strictly just cutting rotates or backstabbing anymore. That's actually kind of Fugly's role on the team now. So if I'm using Cash as an example, just keep illustrating this point, Fugly's kind of the one that's off in B by himself or at mid garage by himself, while you have like Adren, Elige, and Nitro, kind of packed together at A main or mid garage or what have you, and then Hiko's kind of playing that slow squeaky door position. So if it does in fact turn to some type of mid A split or just straight up A hit, then you do have Hiko as a part of the attack, because he's playing a solo position, but he is part of the actual main attack to a degree, kind of coming behind Elige and Nitro and just being actually a part of the execute, whereas Fugly's kind of more off by himself. And I'm not sure if that's just map specific. I haven't seen them play a whole lot of maps just yet. Maybe eventually Hiko and Fugly will kind of switch it up, and Hiko will go back more to like a full-time lurking role. But as of now, he still is one of the extremity players next to Fugly. So you have Fugly and Hiko playing your extremities while the rest kind of pack up. And I think this works totally fine. And I don't think it necessarily is so important who goes first in Elige and Nitro. They're both aggressive riflers. They're both known for their aim. I personally think Elige is a bit more fit to be a first man in type fragger, just because of his fast sensitivity and the fact that I think Nitro is a little bit better of a late round clutch player, so I'd like to have them available for that, which he's at risk of not being able to be a part of that if he's going in first and kind of dying after a couple of kills or whatever. But whatever, I'm sure they will figure out what works best on who goes first. But Elige and Nitro being your two entry or aggressive riflers, I think is the appropriate way to use those players. And then Fugly and Hiko, those are good two extremity players to have for sure. And then Adren being your in-game leader, type support player. Don't have any problems with any of this. But I will say some other problems that still could happen is it seems like, and I'm not going to get too much into how I have this information. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but I've seemed to have heard that maybe certain players on the team want to swap roles all the time or swap positions all the time. They'll be comfortable doing something 1 week, and then 2 weeks later they want to change something up. I think it comes down to a point where they're going to have issues just cracking down and being like, no, you just need to do your job. This is your job. Do this job. I can't keep moving you around. I can't keep changing everything on the team. Like, you just need to sit in a role and play it and practice it and play it well. And you can't be so flaky, in the sense that you can't always want to swap things around just the first moment you feel uncomfortable or the first moment you want to try something else. So it seems like there might be some discipline issues there, so to speak. Maybe a lack of maturity, in the sense that certain people get upset and want to move things around because things aren't working out in their eyes or whatever. So there still seems to be maybe some issues in the team environment that need to be patched up, and that could be due to this player immaturity that will hopefully go away over time as, people play more and grow up, so to speak. Or it could be an issue with leadership, maybe leadership not being as hands-on as it needs to be, whether that be Adren as the in-game leader or the coach or whatever, just not putting people in their place or not being structured enough. This is the same issue that Sean seemed to have with Cloud9 at times, where he would kind of Symphosis overrule him or whatever. I won't get into that. I've already done that in Cloud9 videos, but it could be a similar situation here where maybe Adren isn't being strict enough or isn't being controlling or demanding enough and lets people slide. And so leadership could still be an issue on this team. kind of, scatterbrained here. The opping thing is still probably an issue, right? Like, you have a guy admitting that he doesn't really like to op very much when he's on T side, which probably just means they won't use the op as much on T side. They'll do more 5 rifle setups, which isn't necessarily too terrible with the op in its current state. It's not nearly as effective as it used to be on the terrorist side, unless you're just like a really great player with it. So maybe it's not such a bad thing that they won't use the op as much on T side, but it's still an issue if you do want to use an op on T side. If you do see like a situation where the op could have a huge impact, but you have a guy using it who isn't really comfortable using it and calling at the same time, and then you've already tried passing it to someone else on the team, and that didn't really work out. And of the other 3 people left on the team, neither one of those people would really be a good opper either. So I think it does come down to a point where you may see in the future there be some type of situation where this team still may need to look at bringing in an opper somehow. I don't know who that op would be or who they would replace, but that still could be an issue that might need to be addressed given what we've heard from Adren's mouth himself, and given what we've seen them try to experiment with and the results of that experiment, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, I guess to sum it up, Hiko coming onto the team, certainly on paper for the position he's going to play, is going to be an upgrade. I'm sure he will bring a lot of skill and experience to the table. I think there still are some issues, though, with maybe player discipline or communication issues, maybe even. There may even still be some leadership issues with Adren not being as hands-on as he needs to be, not, cracking down on people as much as he needs to be. Maybe he needs to coach a little bit better these players, like actually coach them on how to play a bit more rather than just leaving them to their own device. I guess the point I would make there is Adren has always been a guy that's had a lot of experienced players around him. He never really had to worry about people on his team being inexperienced and making a lot of mistakes. Like, he could always rely in the past with teams like Dynamic and such that he had a great group of players who were all really intelligent, and he didn't really have to do much to hold their hand through things, whereas I think he has some inexperienced players on this team, some younger up-and-coming guys, where I think he needs to be a bit more hands-on in that capacity. Maybe needs to be a bit more strict. So I think leadership could still be an issue here that needs to be worked on a bit. I don't know about communication issues or what. I think they now, with Nitro going back to rifling, have people in the right roles. It's just going to be about how these players develop, how they mature, if they can continue to get along personality-wise, if leadership can find the right balance of looseness and strictness, and some of these different things. And then finally, this whole op thing still might be an issue that has to be addressed at some point as well. So I think I've kind of mentioned some of the pros and the cons the team have going for them, in the sense that they do have some good players and some good roles, but they still might have some issues there. As far as outlook goes, I guess I've already hinted at that, in the sense that, they look good right now. They have some skilled players, they have some experience, they're in the right spots, but, like I said, the op thing may need to be addressed. Going forward, I'm not sure what else would need to be addressed. I mean, the only thing you can really do is if this 5 doesn't work out, then at that point, yeah, you have to bring in another op, possibly, and then you may even have to bring another in-game leader and put Adren in more of a coaching role. I think Adren would be a great coach, and if things don't work out, he might shift to that while they bring in just a new in-game leader and a new opera or something. So you have to start swapping players again, basically, if this lineup of 5 doesn't work out. So far, the results have been okay. I mean, they're beating teams like Complexity. They beat CLG in the RGM Pro Series, but I'm pretty sure they used Desi as a stand-in for that and didn't even use Hiko, so kind of hard to judge that. They tied Sponsorless, which I guess was a bit disappointing, but it still wasn't a loss, so not too terribly disappointing. And they've been able to beat teams like Method and Enemy, but you expect them to beat those teams with no problem. So they really haven't been tested yet. Like, they haven't really had to match up against the Cloud9, or they haven't played CLG with their full 5 yet. They haven't had to play Illuminosity, the Brazilians. They still have yet to really get a big test on their hands, I feel like. And I think soon with the Odd by Power Invitational, they'll play against some better teams and some best of threes. Hopefully we'll see them, make it to the LAN qualifier for the next major. I know there's like an NA online qualifier they need to go through first, and if that works out, they'll fly to DreamHack Stockholm to play in the offline qualifier. So that'll be another big test to see how things go there. And once we see those things happen, you could probably better analyze, has the move been effective? Is the team looking better? Are they moving in the right direction? All those questions will be answered after we see them really get run through the ringer and really go through some tougher trials than what we've seen thus far. This is really just all speculation at this point, as well as just basing things off of what we've seen from people in the past, is really the best way I can put it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. If this whole Liquid thing doesn't work out, and if we still see CLG continue to struggle, I feel like if you want another really good North American team behind Cloud9 that will compete internationally, there needs to be some type of merging between Liquid and CLG players to make that happen, I feel like. In all honesty, when Hiko was a free agent, and you could kind of get the idea that the whole thing with Nalim wasn't working out, and then over on CLG you see Cutler take an in-game leader position, I thought it would have made sense for Hiko to join CLG in place of maybe Finesse. Not to say that Finesse is like terrible or something, but Hiko's a great lurker. You now have a new in-game leader anyway, so all that Finesse is doing for the team is lurking. I'm sure he helps with leadership, but Finesse could have been a coach for the team. They don't have one, so let Finesse coach, help Cutler out, who's in-game leading and being a support player, and then you have Hiko come in as a lurker. And I thought that would have been maybe the better move in the sense of like how NA would get a second really great, team that could compete internationally. But apparently that's not going to happen. But I thought that would have been actually a good move. That's not to take away from Liquid or anyone. That's just to say I think that would have been a great move in the sense of Hiko really getting the most out of being a free agent and going to a team that would really have a lot of potential internationally. I'm not saying Liquid can't. I think it would have taken less work for CLG, though, with him on it to be able to do that since they're already kind of doing that without him, as opposed to like Liquid, who's really been struggling. So this is more of a project that's going to take some work, like a fixer-upper, rather than like a house that already has a pretty stable foundation, so to speak. But we'll see. Maybe in the future that will still happen if things don't work out with the current Liquid and the current CLG. I think that could be a move to consider. I'm not exactly sure what combination of players I'd put together there. It'd be difficult. Maybe like Hiko, Nitro, Cutler, JDM, and then some type of fifth, whether that be a Tarek or a Fugly or something. I don't know. I didn't put too much thought into it, but that would be maybe a possibility, right? So I think I'll leave it at this. I've already talked quite a lot. I know I didn't really address the whole like salary controversy thing. I mean, I guess I'll just do it really quick now. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think people should have got too upset about Richard Lewis's article. I'm sure he had good information, otherwise he wouldn't have written the article. Obviously, things change sometimes. People aren't aware of what's going on behind the scenes, so they call him out. They don't know where his information came from. And that really is just the burden of being a journalist, is if you could release your sources, then people would probably take your information more seriously if, in fact, your source was a source that people found credible. But if you gave up your source, then you would never get more sources because people give you information in confidentiality. That's just always the golden rule of journalism, is that you don't give up your sources, because then you won't ever get more, or the sources you already have will not want to come to you anymore. So that's just like the burden that journalism always faces, is like the solution to your problem of being taken seriously is also one that causes a much greater problem of not getting information. And I'll just leave it at that. Also, I would just say like Hiko is probably getting paid more than the players on Liquid. I'm sure the Liquid players understand that he's going to get paid more. As far as how much more, it doesn't really matter. I think people just kind of blew that out of proportion. So I think the controversy over all that is just irrelevant. We just need to focus on him as a player on this team now and how the team's going to do going forward with him as a part of it. And outside of that, I think I pretty much touched everything I wanted to. I don't want to ramble too much more, so I'll just sign off now. But be on the lookout for more vlogs in the future. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you do, please follow and subscribe and catch more. Thanks a lot.